Weaponizing the Bureaucracy and the Dumbest Bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. Welcome, Christopher. This podcast is called Weaponizing the Bureaucracy. You can only imagine how it's being weaponized. And we're going to go into that in great detail. And we do have a really terrific Dumbest Bill in America. It's not just dumb, but it's also incredibly scary what this bill can do to you, depending on if you live in this particular county. So again, this is Mark Fisher with Mark the Millennials and Weaponizing the Bureaucracy by Supersizing the IRS. Wall Street Journal. A bipartisan pact to supersize the IRS. Easy for me to say. The bipartisan Senate infrastructure deal still hasn't been written into legislative language, but we already know that its no tax increase pledge is a fudge. The deal is counting on $100 billion in new revenue by supersizing the Internal Revenue Service so it can audit millions more Americans each year. Specifically, the agreement proposes to lavish $40 billion more on the IRS. So adding $40 billion would increase the tax agency's size by more than a third over 10 years. The explicit goal is to squeeze $100 billion more in tax revenue without changing tax laws. In other words, the goal is to give the IRS lots of money so that the IRS can focus on you by auditing you and taking more of your money. And how can they do that? Well, you have to comply. If they send you an audit notice, you're going to be audited. They're going to look at every single aspect of your spending during any given period of time. Typically, it's over a period of a year, and they're going to look at every single check. I've been through this before, by the way, podcast listeners. It's frightening. They can look at every single canceled check, or if you don't write checks, every single canceled expenditure, every single expenditure that has been cleared through your bank, every deposit that has been put into your bank. And they always want to meet you at your home. They always want to meet you there at your home. Why do they want to meet you at your home? Because they want to see what you have. They want to see what you own. They want to kind of look you up and down and see, is this person living far beyond their means? So that would give us some indication that they aren't paying taxes. So the agreement that is being put together by Republicans and Democrats, which would be, and by the way, it's not all Republicans, but it is all Democrats, but it's some Republicans, is to give the IRS specifically $40 billion more so that they can come to your house and audit you and somehow squeeze out of the American people an additional $100 billion to pay for the infrastructure deal, most of which has nothing to do with roads and bridges. The Wall Street Journal goes on to say, we're glad the deal isn't changing tax rates, or at least not until Democrats use budget reconciliation rules in a separate bill that Mr. Biden says is a prerequisite for him to sign the bipartisan deal. In other words, they're going to change tax rates anyway. But how is the IRS going to raise that revenue without a rate change? Presumably, the answer is hiring more agents to conduct more audits of taxpayers, and the implicit assumption is that millions of Americans are somehow cheating on their taxes, and that more audits will discover that cheating to the tune of $100 billion. So podcast listeners, your government intends to weaponize the IRS so that they can shake you down because you're using a tax code that is so highly complicated that it's pretty darn easy to make a mistake, first of all, unless you have an accountant, and unless you can afford an accountant to go through those tax laws and understand them and properly abide by them. That's really, in my opinion, is the only way to truly abide by them is to hire an accountant, and the accountant, follows the letter of the law and files your taxes on your behalf with your signature on them. But there's no doubt in my mind that the IRS is going to come after all taxpayers, not just, and I know what you're thinking, oh, they're only going to go after the rich. Well, yeah, they're going to go after everybody because you can't raise all of that money unless you go after primarily the people that are least able to defend themselves against the IRS, right? The people that are least able to defend themselves are the people who don't have enough money to hire accountants, to hire lawyers, to protect themselves from the overbearing federal government. So weaponizing the bureaucracy is all about that. And we had another story also that's hit the news about the IRS, and it deals with stolen tax records. So ProPublica has reported about stolen tax data from 25 wealthy taxpayers. So let's say that again. So ProPublica has used the stolen tax data of 25 wealthy taxpayers and has published that information. Now, the only way you can get that information, ladies and gentlemen, is if you do what? Is if you have someone who works at the IRS, who's a friend, who's going to give you that information. So if you're going to weaponize the IRS, you're the federal government, your spending is out of control, you need more money to continue to buy off more interest groups. So you weaponize the IRS to shake down the American people. And then after you shake down the American people, then you go back to the IRS and find out, well, who's been cheating? Now that's, by the way, supposed to be a matter of privacy, unless it, of course, goes to court, because if it's a criminal matter, that's a whole different thing. But as a general principle, it's supposed to be a private matter. You know as well as I do, that there are people in the IRS now whose sole goal it is to act as Democrat agents because they think that certain taxpayers shouldn't have what they have. Now, that is a debate for Congress. That's not a debate for the IRS. The IRS's job is to implement the laws as passed by the United States Congress and signed by the President of the United States. Their job is not to make the law, but they are trying to make the law because they're disclosing the taxpayer information. And that, of course, is not just against the law, it is criminal. But no one ever seems to go to jail from the IRS. I mean, Lois Lerner wouldn't allow taxpayers who were filing to create nonprofits that dealt with political organizations during the Tea Party era, during the Obama administration. She wouldn't process those. And she never went to jail. And should have, by the way. She should have been required to go to jail or somehow cop a plea to turn in the people that were guilty. So the IRS has been slowly weaponized, first by the Obama administration, and now they're perfecting it under the Biden administration because the United States Congress, under the guise of both Democrats and Republicans, yes, both Democrats and Republicans, not all Republicans, but certainly all Democrats and some Republicans, are engaged in such out of control spending, podcast listeners, such out of control spending, that the only way you can possibly pay for it is to constantly create higher taxes and weaponize your bureaucracy to shake people down for ever more dollars. And it's absolutely frightening. I mean, I keep looking at this myself and I say, well, at what point is enough money? Do you have enough money if you're in the middle class? At what point do you have enough money to go into retirement and save and have enough to take care of yourself when you don't have to work anymore? And as long as the government is growing, and as long as the government keeps spending the way it is, there's no amount of money that you're going to be safe with in retirement, because they're always going to be coming after you, nickel and diming you, fees and taxes, and the IRS coming after you. So be prepared for this, because this is the work of the Democrat Party, which is overspending, and it's also the work of some Republicans. Now, look, if you don't know how Congress works, you need to know this. If you're Republican, you probably want to do everything you can to water down this bill. And there are Democrats in the real world of Congress. There are Democrats who probably say to you, the only way we're going to water down the bill is if you vote for the bill. And so they use this kind of leverage in Congress to make sure, and they do it, by the way, in state legislatures too, and say, we're only going to give you the stuff that you want in the bill and add it in to the stuff that we want in our bill if you vote for the bill or if you give something in return. And the problem is that the way our system works now, these bills in the United States government, in Congress and the Senate, are so massive. They're not single subject bills. They are many subject bills dealing with all kinds of different things that you're forced in many cases to try to compromise because the bill deals with a dozen or so different subjects. For example, it doesn't just deal with roads and bridges, the infrastructure bill. It deals with renewable energy. It deals with housing and affordable housing. It deals with pushing people from the cities out to the suburbs into affordable housing. It deals with so many unrelated subjects. And that, of course, is why, and I'm going to give a big plug, not just now, but later on in this podcast, this is why we really do need the Convention of States, because it's clear to me when a bureaucracy is being weaponized that you need to push back on the federal government, and there is a process to do that. And Article 5 Convention of States, and it's a wonderful organization, and I really urge you to join it because it is more needed now than ever. So not only is the government weaponizing itself, but it's literally ruining the economy. Gas prices have hit a 7-year high. And here's what it says in the New York Post. Gas prices hit 7-year high as stations run low on fuel ahead of July 4th. So the New York Post, gas stations across the country are facing fuel shortages, driving prices, to a 7-year high as more than 40 million Americans prepare to hit the road for the 4th of July weekend. The nationwide average price for a gallon of regular unleaded gas hit $3.09 on Monday, the highest price Americans have been asked to shell out ahead of the holiday weekend since 2014. According to the data from the American Automobile Association, AAA forecasts that 43.6 million Americans will travel by car this weekend, the most so far this year. Today, 89% of the U.S. gas stations are selling regular unleaded for $2.75 or more. That is a stark increase over last July 4th, when only a quarter of stations were selling gas for more than $2.25, said Jeanette McGee, a AAA spokesman. Road trippers will pay the most to fill up the holidays since 2014. And of course, there's a picture in this article of an Exxon gas station in California in the greater Los Angeles area, where regular gasoline, podcast listeners, as of today, and has a picture of the sign, because you have to see the sign, and the sign shows you the price of gasoline. Regular gasoline is $5.95 a gallon in the greater Los Angeles area. Why do you suppose? Why is gasoline so expensive in California? Because, of course, the taxes. But this particular crisis is in large part, the gas crisis I'm talking about with the gas prices, is in large part because of the fact that there aren't enough drivers to deliver the gasoline. Those big tanker trucks that you see, there aren't enough drivers to drive them. Ever since COVID, so many of the drivers decided to find other jobs because their job went from working almost 7 days a week to not working at all because people weren't leaving home, so they weren't buying gasoline. And so therefore the drivers are like, well, there's no future in this, so I'm going to go do something else. They haven't come back to this particular job. And that is the primary reason. But that doesn't explain the high prices, of course. And you could say, oh, sure it does, because demand is increasing because there isn't enough supply. Well, look, this is because of the Biden administration and their policies of basically shutting down pipelines. And everybody knows it because there is a sense in the markets for petroleum that the Biden administration is going to continue in this direction intentionally because they want you to buy an electric car. They don't want you to use a combustible engine car. And everybody knows it. So they are intentionally driving up the prices and hurting who? They are hurting the poorest of the poor, the least among us, because those are the people that can't afford to buy a new car, let alone an electric car. And so not only is the government weaponizing us against us with the IRS, not only are they weaponizing against us with the gas prices because they've hit a 7-year high. They're weaponizing against businesses, small, medium, and large. So in Axios magazine, there's an article that says businesses try to adapt to changing climate politics. So corporations and their K Street lobbyists are grappling with rising pressure for action on climate change from the White House and its Capitol Hill allies. Why it matters. Democrats' ascendance is prompting powerful business and industrial interests to try and influence the new initiatives in their favor, or at least limit the fallout. The Securities Exchange, here are some examples, okay? The Securities and Exchange Commission is being weaponized. It's getting an earful from companies and trade groups over its plans to mandate disclosure of climate-related risks and opportunities. I want to read this again. The Securities and Exchange Commission is getting an earful from the business community because companies and trade groups are upset that the Securities and Exchange Commission is mandating that those companies disclose climate-related risks and opportunities. So if you are a company that, let's say, sells goods that are in packages and you ship them to grocery stores, let's say it's just butter, okay? Butter. You're a butter company. You make butter. The butter company goes inside of packaging. Well, that could, in theory, be considered, according to the Democrats and the weaponized bureaucracy, it could be considered a climate risk because of all of the paper that you're using to make the butter and to cover the butter up and ship it, right? Because that eventually ends up in a landfill, and then you have methane gas. This is the kind of things, these are the kinds of things that are being weaponized, and they're weaponizing the government because they want to control every aspect of human life. They don't control the private sector, but they're trying to control the private sector, namely the bureaucracy and the Democrats who use the bureaucracy as their agents. So what is noteworthy is that many powerful interests in finance and industry aren't trying to block these rules. Instead, their comments are geared toward helping shape the rules and the breadth of the rules and the specifics. For instance, the National Association of Manufacturers says mandates should focus only on metrics that are financially material to the investors in a specific business. Well, you know, in the country that I live in, or at least the country that I thought that I lived in, the Securities and Exchange Commission couldn't change their mandate to oversee publicly traded companies and the raising of capital. They couldn't change that mandate to include climate-related risks and opportunities without the Congress giving them that authority. But apparently, they've decided that they do have the authority, and they are doing what? They're shaking down the business community. And here's another example. K Street powerhouses, including the American Petroleum Institute and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, have adopted new climate positions this year. API in March endorsed putting a price on CO2 emissions, while in January, the Chamber similarly called for a market-based approach to speed emissions cuts. This is all being done to be able to get some sort of space from the Biden administration, some sort of, forgiveness, some sort of self-flagellation of the business community to be able to say, okay, we're really trying to help out. Both groups also now embrace regulation of the potent greenhouse gas methane under the Clean Air Act. And then lastly, renewable energy companies, electric vehicle producers, and other clean tech interests, meanwhile, are rushing to take advantage of new openings for supportive policy. In other words, the renewable energy companies are rushing to the Biden administration, not only for more handouts, but to put their opponents out of business using this climate regulation that's being implemented by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the bureaucracy. So how do they do that? Well, as you know, some of these petroleum companies are being sued. And they're being sued because they're in the petroleum business. Because they're saying, well, obviously petroleum pollutes. And yes, it does, podcast listeners. We all know that. But as we saw recently with, what was the code again? They use petroleum products. They make, what's that code that we did the dumbest bill in America? Or no, go woke or go broke. It was the coat. North Face. Yes. North Face. That was Christopher Hopkins, by the way, our producer. North Face is the company that basically said, we're not going to buy any petroleum products or sell our products to, we're not going to sell our products to petroleum companies. That's what it was. And then the petroleum companies were like, do you realize, North Face, that you use petroleum to make all of your coats and your products? So it really made a lot. It was really kind of funny, obviously. But here's the problem. The whole purpose of weaponizing the bureaucracy through climate politics is to shake down the business community and get them to provide lots of donations to the Democrat Party and to vote Democrat. Everybody knows it. And that is the whole purpose of weaponizing the bureaucracy, period, is because it turns the United States government into no longer a republic, no longer a democracy. It turns us into, of course, some sort of totalitarian government because elected officials have ceded their authority to pass bills and instead have just given carte blanche authority to these bureaucrats to change rules depending on who is or isn't in office. And that's why we need single subject legislation, because single subject legislation would be required in Congress. And if you had it, the United States congressmen and congresswomen and senators would only be able to put a bill in on a single subject. For example, let's say they wanted to raise the gas tax. That would be one bill. The gas tax hereby will be raised at the federal level from X to Y. Well, I don't think such a bill would pass. But naturally, if you do an infrastructure bill that includes 20 or 30 different subjects, you can sneak that in there. And then you get enough people to vote for it because they're getting a certain amount of good things for their district. And that's the problem. That is the problem. It's why we need the Convention of States. And interestingly enough, while it's so that the Convention of States does not have the single subject rule for passing bills and for introducing bills at the federal level as one of their priorities, I do think it's something that they will adopt eventually, because I see the same problem in my state capital in Annapolis, where they actually have a single subject rule and don't even follow it. And that's why if you have an Article 5 convention and you are crystal clear about what a single subject rule is, no bill can be introduced unless it is a single subject and may not include any other subject whatsoever. Then you put that into the United States Constitution. Well, now congressmen and congresswomen are going to have to vote on thousands of bills individually and argue over each individual bill's merit. Something not easy to do, of course. So not only is the government weaponizing us, but states are starting to fight back. So we've been talking about this IRS weaponization, the weaponization of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and how the United States Congress and the President of the United States are engaged in out of control spending. All of those things are true. Okay. All of those things are true. Some states are pushing back because they're so concerned about the value of the US dollar that they are introducing and passing bills to prepare for the worst. Okay. I don't want to say to you podcast listeners that the worst is going to happen, but let's face it, any adult who is a critical thinker always prepares for the worst. How do you prepare for the worst? Well, you don't just save money and put money away, but you also put it in places where you think are really safe. Well, what is a safe place to put money? Where is a safe place to put money? The bank. I'm sure you're saying the bank, of course. Stocks and bonds, maybe depending on the market situation. Gold, silver, platinum. Well, get this. Arizona has passed House Bill 2014. That's the bill number. Arizona's HB 2014 bolsters residents' ability to use precious metals to diversify away from paper currency. And it paves the way for the use of gold and silver as currency and essentially acknowledges that precious metals can work as a hedge against inflation. As Representative Mark Fincham, Republican, points out in the Arizona Capitol Times, the bill reflects the belief that the purchase of gold and silver coins with Federal Reserve notes, those dollar bills now printed by the government, is simply an exchange of one form of currency for another. To tax this exchange would be like taxing someone for exchanging 2 dimes and a nickel for a quarter. What you're doing here, the way I understand it is, quote, is maybe we ought to not tax money, asserts former Congressman and presidential candidate Ron Paul. And I think that's a good idea. I like to not tax a lot of things, but certainly it makes no sense to tax money. For example, if someone buys a 1-ounce gold American Eagle coin selling for $1,300 one year and sells it at a future date for a higher figure, that person has not experienced a capital gain, argues Fincham, since it's the government-issued dollar bills that have dropped in buying power. Arizona's new law will go into effect August 9th, 2017, and residents holding U.S. gold and silver coins and selling it for more than its original cost will no longer be subject to state income taxes. That's huge. So as a result of not taxing the buying and selling of gold, whether it be capital gains taxes or whether it be sales taxes, it's not taxed whatsoever. As a result of not taxing precious metals, now you can hold those precious metals in a safe at your house or in a safety deposit box at the bank or the post office, I suppose. And you can use that to exchange, buy, and sell things. So you buy something, you can pay with gold coins or silver coins or platinum coins. You sell something, you can also receive those coins. And no longer will you be taxed on those coins, which is, of course, when you think about it, makes no sense because these states, what they're doing is they're putting these bills in because they fundamentally don't trust the federal government to do the right thing. All the more reason why we need a convention of states, right, Chris?
Absolutely.
So get this, Idaho, House Bill 206. Similar to Arizona's House Bill 2014, Idaho's House Bill 206 expands existing sales tax exemptions, meaning you don't pay sales tax, and it ends the state income tax on the sales of precious metals, bullion, and monetized bullion. So in other words, you don't pay sales tax and you don't pay income tax when you use precious metals or when you sell precious metals. Quote, gold and silver is an alternative to holding Federal Reserve notes, and it is the only alternative that the U.S. Constitution says that the state can allow as another currency. It's unfair to tax it just as it's unfair to tax losses on Federal Reserve notes, says Representative Ron Nate of Idaho. The Idaho House passed House Bill 206 and now awaits Senate and governor approval as of March 15th of 2017. Now, I know we're in 2021, but all of these bills are progressing faster and faster across many states. If passed, House Bill 206 will pave the way for residents of Idaho to use gold and silver as an additional means of protecting their savings against potential devaluation of the American dollar. In Texas, ladies and gentlemen, House Bill 78, House Bill 483, Senate Bill 2097. Texas appears to be a champion for sound money laws with multiple pieces of legislation already passed and others in the works. Effective October of 2013, House Bill 78 eliminated the sales tax on gold and silver and precious metals. In 2015, Governor Abbott signed House Bill 483, authorizing the establishment and administration of a state bullion depository. Imagine that. We've always had federal bullion depositories, but Texas wants their own. Only in Texas. Don't mess with Texas. 2 years later, the governor announced that the Lone Star Tangible Assets would be the private vendor tasked with building and operating the Texas Bullion Depository. But Texas isn't done yet. In 2017, Senator Bob Hall introduced Senate Bill 2097, which would establish gold and silver as legal tender in the state, prohibit the state from seizing individual holdings of precious metals, and eliminate any tax, charge, or penalty on any exchange of federal notes, dollars that is, for gold and silver. So you have dollars. You want to buy silver and gold. There's no tax on that silver and gold when you pay dollars to the person from whom you're buying the gold and silver. The passage of SB 2097 would create currency competition and reduce residents' reliance on paper assets. Imagine that. Currency competition. When was the last time you heard that term in the United States where there was a growing movement, not just by individuals, but by states actually affirmatively acting to protect the value of your wealth so that you didn't get taxed on exchanging your wealth of dollars with your wealth of precious metals. I mean, the same thing is happening in Wyoming, Tennessee, Kansas, Louisiana, and a number of other states. And it's a growing movement, ladies and gentlemen, a growing movement. It's a growing movement for good reason. Because as long as government is weaponizing the IRS, we started out talking about the podcast about the weaponization of the IRS. As long as government is weaponizing the IRS, then you should move some of your currency out of dollars, not because you're trying to skirt the IRS. I want to make that very clear, podcast listeners. I don't want the IRS knocking on my door. Not because you're not trying to pay the IRS in accordance with American law, but because the IRS is being encouraged to be super aggressive to come after your money. And to me, if you can exchange gold and buy things with gold and buy things with silver and buy things with platinum, then you actually don't really need the bank, do you? I mean, all you need is a safe in your house, probably a gun too to protect the safe, and an alarm system to protect the safe. But that's really all you need. It needs to be full of really, really small coins, because obviously an ounce of gold is now, I've forgotten, it's at one point it was pushing $2,000 an ounce. Silver, I don't recall, but you need varying sizes of those coins and you need to hold them yourself. Then here's the question, podcast listeners. How would the US government even know what you had at that point? How would they know? They would have no idea. The United States government would have no idea actually how much money you have saved. And then what's the IRS going to do? Come to you and say, well, Mr. Fisher, we're coming to audit you. This is, of course, is the current way. We're coming to audit you because last year you saved money in the bank and you made $5,000 from interest in the bank. And that interest is taxable, which it is, by the way. Conversely, you have a safe full of gold and silver, little tiny coins, instead of having the cash in the bank. And what is the IRS going to do? Well, Mr. Fisher, we're going to audit you because you didn't pay taxes on the appreciation of the gold and the silver. It's like, well, wait a minute. Why am I paying taxes on the appreciation of my money anyway? Because when I put that money in the bank and I'm saving it, I already paid taxes on that money. But now you're taxing me on the money that I'm making on the money, which the states are now saying, some states are saying, we're not going to tax you anymore on gold and silver, whether it be sales taxes when you buy it with dollars or when it appreciates in value. Kind of interesting, right? I mean, I think it's super interesting because this is the way it should be. And this shows us how disconnected we are from government and how disconnected government is from us, in that we've been accepting this nonsense for so many years. The idea that we're paying taxes on our savings, on the income that we make on our savings. I want to make that clear. Okay, now that's fine. I'm okay with capital gains taxes on stocks, right? Because you're buying a piece of a company and you're buying it for $10 and then you sell the piece of company and let's say it's now worth $100. I'm okay with that. But when you're actually using something that is more stable in terms of monetary value than the dollar, which is gold and silver, by stable, I'm not saying it doesn't go up and down, but I'm saying it's not going to be as scary. It's always going to have some value. Whereas the dollar, there's a sense that it's not going to have any value, or that they're going to come after those dollars. So it's kind of an interesting trend that's happening in the States. And it just shows you the incredibly brilliant way that our founders set up the Constitution by giving the states the power. And of course, the federal government doesn't want that. The Democrats who run the federal government, the Democrats who are in the bureaucracy who run the federal government, want to do everything they can to take away states' rights. And we've talked about that many times, like, for example, For the People Act, where they're literally trying to take over elections, a federal takeover of elections. So if you also want to talk about another area of weaponization of a bureaucracy, the NSA, the organization that's supposed to spy and eavesdrop on overseas conversations so as to protect the homeland from attacks. Okay, that's the NSA's job at the end of the day, is to protect the homeland from actions that may be occurring overseas, plans, in other words, to attack the homeland, such as 9/11, which they missed. The NSA has apparently been spying on Tucker Carlson. Talk about the ultimate bureaucratic weaponization. So Carlson was talking last night about how the NSA is kind of, they responded, but it really wasn't a response about whether or not they were spying on him. And by spying, I mean monitoring his conversations, certainly his verbal conversations on the phone, his texts, and his emails. So this is in the Daily Wire. The National Security Agency's response to allegations that it is spying on Fox News host Tucker Carlson sparked a wide range of responses on Tuesday night, with most people falling into one of two camps. Either they noted the carefully crafted way the statement was constructed, or they used the statement claim that Carlson was lying. Before getting to the responses, the following is a brief timeline of the events that transpired. So it says here what Carlson claimed at the start of the week. He said, yesterday we heard from a whistleblower within the U.S. government who reached out to warn us that the NSA, the National Security Agency, is monitoring our electronic communications and is planning to leak them in an attempt to take this show off the air. And of course, it goes on and on and on. And then Carlson responded to the NSA statement by stating in part, tonight's statement from the NSA, because the NSA gave a statement in return, does not deny that. Instead, it comes with this non sequitur in part, quote, Tucker Carlson has never been an intelligence target of the agency. Okay, glad to know, but the question remains, did the Biden administration read my personal emails? And so if someone called you from the NSA, a whistleblower, and said, hey, Mark, the NSA is monitoring your emails, texts, and phone conversations, maybe even your mail, and they're doing it, and obviously not supposed to do it, and I'm working for the NSA, so I know this firsthand. And of course, your first response would be what? Oh, come on. Give me an example. How can that be true? And the person says, well, let me read one of the emails that I have. And it was, let's say, an email to your wife. Well, certainly your wife isn't going to turn over that email to the NSA. So it's not like some friend who's turning it over, right? Or some enemy that you sent an email to and the enemy is just trying to take you off the air. Your wife's not going to do that. And so that's how I'm sure it was probably verified. It was probably a very personal communication, or communication with a very trusted aide or trusted friend that was leaked. And so talk about weaponization. I mean, this is frightening stuff. So we have the Biden administration weaponizing the IRS, weaponizing the Security and Exchange Commission, weaponizing the NSA. And you wonder why the Convention of States organization is growing. I keep plugging that. It's growing because we need to push back against an ever-growing and overpowerful federal government, the same kind of government that we got rid of when we came to the United States, when we came to America, I should say. We got rid of those European monarchies where they were always large governments who controlled every aspect of your life and could take property and also your freedom away at a whim. Unbelievable stuff. So get this, podcast listeners. DeSantis, the governor of Florida, is instituting civics literacy in Florida because there is so much civics illiteracy in the United States. He has signed a bill requiring high school students learn the evils of totalitarianism and communism. And so we have a number of clips on this. This is pretty cool stuff because there's actually a number of clips, first being DeSantis, of course, talking about it. Second, talking about the dangerous ideologies. And third, an individual from Nicaragua who talks about the evils of totalitarianism and communism, which is unique to Florida, podcast listeners, because South Florida has so many refugees who are now American citizens who came from where? They came from Nicaragua and Cuba and Venezuela and other places. But those three countries in particular, since they are run by absolute totalitarian / communist governments, certainly authoritarian governments where there is no rule of law. So here's Governor DeSantis speaking on Florida's civic literacy reform law. Again, the law is called Civic Literacy Reform Law. And listen how civics illiteracy is explained by Governor DeSantis. Here it is.
And today we're going to sign 3 bills that address key pillars of our civic literacy efforts. It's crucial to ensure that we teach our students how to be responsible citizens. They need to have a good working knowledge of American history, American government, and the principles that underlie our Constitution and Bill of Rights. And these efforts are needed. A recent survey found that only 2 in 5 American adults can correctly name the 3 branches of government. More than a third of Americans cannot name any of the rights that are protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And in 2018, a poll found that only 36% of Americans could pass a multiple choice version of the citizenship test that our naturalized citizens have to take before becoming American citizens.
So in order to become a citizen of the United States, you have to take a citizenship test, right? To learn about American history and American exceptionalism, as they should be required to do so. And most Americans couldn't pass it if they had to take it themselves. And you think there's a problem in higher ed? Do you think there's a problem in K-12 education? Yeah. But Florida is at least acknowledging there's a problem. And of course, we're so busy teaching CRT from K-12. We're so busy talking about how America is not an exceptional country. It's actually an evil country. We're so busy doing that no one even knows anything about our history. In fact, they're actually much more likely, some of these people, certainly Democrats, to engage in, or at least like countries that are engaged in totalitarianism and communism, namely Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, China, North Korea, just to name a few. So here's what the bill actually does now as it relates to dangerous ideologies vis-a-vis the education system in high school in the state of Florida. We have that clip from DeSantis, and here it is.
The bill also expands our previous efforts in civics to add a requirement for the high school government class that students receive instruction on the evils of communism and totalitarian ideologies. We have a number of people in Florida, particularly southern Florida, who've escaped totalitarian regimes, who've escaped communist dictatorships to be able to come to America. We want all students to understand the difference. Why would somebody flee across shark-infested waters, say leaving from Cuba to come to southern Florida? Why would somebody leave a place like Vietnam? Why would people leave these countries and risk their life to be able to come here? It's important that students understand that.
Yeah, so that's DeSantis talking about what the bill actually does. And our producer, Christopher Hopkins, says, I can't believe that's not already a thing. Why isn't that already required? So podcast listeners get this about the DeSantis bill that he just signed. I placed the story from the Daily Caller about this bill that DeSantis signed. And the Daily Caller's story is titled, DeSantis signs bill requiring high school students learn evils of communism and totalitarian ideologies. Pretty well written article. Well, I posted that bill on my Friends of Mark Fisher Facebook page. And I'm just telling you this because of how all the kooks came out and how messed up our country is with respect to the lack of education and lack of understanding in our country about what those ideologies really do and how they always end up the same, which is with lots of people dead and lots of people starving and lots of misery. So I have one guy, his name is John Kriebel, says, "My life was harmed more by the irrational fight against communism and socialism than either of those ideologies have ever hurt me." It's all about him, by the way. "In fact, it is communists in the workplace who got us the labor reforms Reagan ended, to all our detriment." So that's just one comment, okay? So of course I responded, "All the more reason as to why we need high school students to learn about the evils of communism and totalitarianism," which is really the purpose of this post. Naturally, people are always trying to take you off of your post on Facebook and on social media. Instagram obviously doesn't matter where you post. The Democrats and the progressives especially are always trying to take you off the message to talk about things that are unrelated because they can't argue the merits of most ideas. They don't want to argue them because they've never had to defend their arguments because that's how we teach them. And so I have this other person who wrote, "Mark, I've always liked and respected you, but it seems to me DeSantis is demonstrating the hypocrite that he is. How is it okay to teach the evils of communism and Marxism in schools, yet teaching about the evils of racism and its history in our country," scrolling down here, is not allowed. What? The teaching of racism, the history of Jim Crow, and the history of slavery is not allowed? I mean, are you serious? Of course it's being taught. In fact, that's probably almost exclusively what's being taught. I mean, we have a Black History Month. It's the month of February. It's what's taught the whole month of February in K-12 in civics. And then she goes on, "When they teach about the evils, will they also include how Reagan's trickle-down economics not only did not work, but made the wealthy richer and put the working poor in deeper poverty? DeSantis is working to rally Trump's base for his own presidential run. This is purely a political move designed to deepen the huge divide that already plagues our country." No, when you're trying to educate people, young lady, I don't know if she's young or not, okay, but I'm just being respectful. When you're trying to educate people about world history and about communism and about totalitarianism, that is a good thing because you are educating them. The idea that you would be triggered by communism and ideologies such as that, and that we would be educating people about what happened in the 20th century and what is currently happening in those kinds of countries, the fact that you would be triggered about that and are creating a false equivalency between that and the United States of America demonstrates to me that you need to take the course. You just need to take the course. Or maybe just get a one-way ticket to North Korea. Try it out, see how that works, because the last time I think we had a student or an individual who was an American who accidentally wandered across the border in North Korea, he ended up dead. He ended up in prison for a while and then dead. And there's no rule of law. There's no place to go to adjudicate that death. But of course, the United States is just like them. We're just as bad. Get a brain. I mean, give me a break. So we have another clip. And this clip is from Ana Margarita Albanza. She's originally from Nicaragua. DeSantis introduces her, and she speaks about how she came to the United States of America at the age of 6. And it was because she was being brainwashed in school and didn't learn anything except the kind of ideology that they wanted you to learn. In other words, hey, things are getting better. Meanwhile, there are food lines, right? There's plenty of gasoline to drive your car. Meanwhile, the tanks are empty everywhere you go. That kind of nonsense, which is what occurs in those kinds of countries. Very Orwellian. So Ana Margarita Abanza came from Nicaragua to the United States at the age of 6 and spoke up at this press conference with the governor of Florida and talked about why this is so important based on her own unique life experiences. We have that clip, and here
And
it is.
I came here when I was 16 years old from Nicaragua, running away from that Leninist Marxist regime. I was president of the school government, and they were trying to brainwash us in thinking that they were bringing benefits and well-being to the people of Nicaragua. Obviously not. Right now, that country in Nicaragua, the one that I was born in, is even worse than the day that I left. So I'm thankful to be here. I would defend this country with my life if I had to.
So they told Miss Albanza, that things were getting better. Okay, when she was a kid. Things are just getting better every day here in Nicaragua. And she left, and her family left because they weren't getting better, and they knew they were being lied to. They knew it was a totalitarian regime, a communist regime, an autocrat that runs the country. And so they decided to leave. They came to the United States. We welcomed them. They live in Florida. They're American citizens. And she says it's now worse there than it ever was. And they continue to lie to their people, which is what those governments do. There's no transparency. And what do they do to her in school? They were brainwashing her in kindergarten. Oh, what a surprise. Kind of like what they're doing here with CRT, telling you that your country is really bad and that totalitarianism, communism is the way to go. Marxism is the way to go. So DeSantis is taking on these nuts. By these nuts, I mean the nuts of the left, who actually think that America should be extinguished and replaced with a Marxist regime. And they really do believe that. And our country is so dysfunctional because so few people understand the civics and the basics and the basic history of this country. And they certainly don't understand our Constitution, let alone why it was put in place. What were the motivations for putting the Constitution in place? And it was about the protection of what? The individual, not the protection of the state. It's about the protection of the individual from the state. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up? Mr. Producer. Here it is. And it's the dumbest bill in America. And it is from Montgomery County, Maryland. It's called the Community Justice Academy. So Montgomery County, Maryland podcast listeners has a climate action plan that was just adopted by their county council and their county executive, the very dumb Mark Elrich. And it has in it a thing called the Community Justice Academy. So a little background on this, and that's going to require me to just read a small story about this bill. It says Montgomery County, and by the way, this is in Maryland Matters, Montgomery County plan would achieve net zero emissions 10 years earlier than the state goals. In 2017, the Montgomery County Council declared a climate emergency and committed to use all available powers and resources to reach ambitious goal of zero carbon emissions by 2035. When the council set the goals for addressing greenhouse gas emissions, we did not know how we were going to achieve them. We really didn't know, Montgomery County Executive Mark B. Elrich, Democrat, said during a news conference earlier this week. Between 2015 and 2018, Montgomery County's greenhouse gas emissions declined by 3%. So they were already declining, as they are across the country, by the way. Elrich was one of the council members who led the 2017 climate resolution effort. Now, 4 years later in 2021, as county executive, Elrich has unveiled a 300-page plan to get to zero carbon emissions by 2035, which is, he said, the most ambitious climate goals in the country. By the way, that is true. These are, no doubt, by a county government, the most ambitious climate goals of any county government. It engages every aspect of human life that you can possibly imagine. Montgomery County's climate action plan lays out 86 actions that would get the country to reach its goal, and officials plan to start working on 75 of them this year. So There are 86 action items, and they're going to do 75 this year. So they're going to spend a ton of money on this plan. But that's not all the plan does. The plan also has, get this, podcast listeners, you're not going to believe it. There was a draft plan last year in December, but the final climate action plan that was adopted just this week includes a community justice academy. What the heck is a community justice academy? A community justice academy includes community ambassadors who will be responsible for educating their neighbors about climate change and encouraging their neighbors to reduce their carbon behavior. So you're going to have people knocking on your door who live in your neighborhood, and they're going to be working for the county government as ambassadors to tell you how you should be running your life in every aspect of it. Because let's face it, according to the left, climate change includes everything under the sun, and they can basically control you under the guise of climate change. So here is MyMC Media, which is Montgomery Community Media. We have a clip from them. And here is, I believe, the Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich on the climate crisis and the emergency. Here it is.
We've got to treat this kind of like we treated COVID, with the same level of seriousness and the same level of urgency.
So we have to treat it. That was Mark Elrich, by the way, the county executive of Montgomery County. We have to treat this like COVID with the same level of urgency. So if we treat it like COVID, does that mean we're going to send all the climate zombies to nursing homes? Just a curiosity. I'm just curious. Maybe that's what we should do. So here's Montgomery County's climate goals. They spell them out. I think this is kind of the media and Elrich kind of combined talking about it. We have that clip, and here it is.
Montgomery County's climate goals are to reduce community-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2027 and 100% by 2035.
The plan outlines 86 climate actions, and the county plans to act on 75 of those in fiscal year 2022. Recommendations focus on reducing emissions in energy, buildings, and transportation, reducing climate risk, and centering racial equity, among other recommendations. Leaders said it will take all county residents to make the plan successful.
So what does centering racial equity mean? It's part, see what I'm saying when I say climate change includes everything and every aspect of controlling your life, and there's no such thing as a single subject anymore when it comes to a bill? The climate change goal or the climate change bill in Montgomery County includes centering racial equity. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that have to do with the so-called climate emergency? I don't know. But they certainly have this Community Justice Academy. We're going to have people knocking on your door like little Marxists, as they currently are in much of Montgomery County. Not all, but most, because that's the way they're taught in the public school system, by the way. They're completely and utterly in Montgomery County brainwashed about this particular subject matter, and they're incapable of thinking independently, not about whether there is or isn't a climate crisis, but actually asking, what is climate change? How do you define it? And then let's go single subject at a time and see if there is a problem on a subject by subject basis, and then trying to fix it. But that's not what they want to do. They just want to tax you and try to control your life. So here's Mark Elrich, subtly referring to his Community Justice Academy, which we're now going to talk about. That's the big part of this bill. Listen to how he refers to this. This is government basically engaging community leaders and volunteers and ambassadors to knock on your door and tell you you're doing things wrong. Here it is.
Now, we saw that in COVID, that people, when they understand the importance of their actions, did the right thing. And what we're hoping happens with climate change now is that we can help build an awareness of the importance of people's individual actions so that people will do the right thing.
So people will do the right thing when they're encouraged and when they're told to do the right thing by these ambassadors. The ambassadors, of course, belonging to the Community Justice Academy of the Climate Action Plan in Montgomery County. So, podcast listeners, in Annapolis, okay, just to give you an idea of what some of these people look like, these community ambassadors. Here we have a great example because in Annapolis, when we passed putting offshore wind, we passed a bill that would put offshore wind off the coast of the state. And of course, literally would ruin the view shed of the coastline. Democrats didn't care, right? Because it's wind, it's clean energy. And because it's clean energy, there's no side effect. Nothing's really bad about it. And they're going to put all these massive wind turbines right off the coast of Ocean City so that you could see them from this beautiful beach where everybody vacations. So many people vacation in Maryland. And it would literally ruin this seaside resort. Well, in Annapolis, when they were trying to pass this bill, one of these climate justice warriors, and he'll probably be part of the Community Justice Academy in Montgomery County, he was advocating for his cause for wind energy in Maryland off the coast, irrespective of the environmental damage it would do to the seabed, to the fisheries, and to the migrating birds, and to the view shed. They didn't care about that because, it's wind turbine, it must be fine. Everything's fine. Don't look anywhere else. Well, we have a picture of this guy, okay? Now, if you're watching the podcast, you'll see this dude. Chris is going to put this picture up. He has, I'll explain it if you're listening. He's wearing a wind turbine. And by wind turbine, I don't mean like a little hat with a little turbine on it. He made this I guess he used, what is that called again? Tin foil, and put tin foil hat, right? He put tin foil around this tube, and the tube looks like it's a solid 5 feet tall, maybe 6 feet tall. So it comes up from his head, this tube, and it's all tin foil, and it's like this thick, this wide, and then the tin foil at the very top, of course, is this massive wind turbine with these huge blades that look to me like they're 2 feet to 2.5 feet in diameter, and they're 3 blades, and it turns, of course. So this is the kind of person that comes to a state capitol to advocate for these types of bills. And that's the kind of person that's going to come to your house, the front door of your house. And they're going to say to you, sir, why don't you have a composting toilet? I'm part of the Community Justice Academy, and I'm an ambassador. And my understanding is you don't have a composting toilet. Your neighbors do. And you're like, well, what's a composting toilet? And you're like, well, did you see the movie Why Him? They've got one there. You got to be just like that. Another community ambassador. Sir, I've noticed that you use a trash can. You're causing a climate crisis. Or, sir, you should put solar panels on your roof. Well, that's to be expected, right? Because you have to have solar panels on your roof. After all, it's your roof. You don't get to decide what's on it anymore, even though you pay taxes on the house. Or, sir, why do you drive an SUV? By the way, how would you respond to that, Chris? Like someone came to your house and said, sir, why do you drive an SUV? I'm a climate ambassador, part of the Climate Justice Academy, as they call themselves.
To get to my job?
No, it's like, why don't you drive an electric car? Why don't you drive a small car? That's what they're trying to get you to do, right? Yeah. Or, sir, you're cutting your grass too much. Or, sir, I can see you must have a really high water bill because I've noticed that you have an irrigation system and you're watering your grass, and that shouldn't be allowed. This, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly what these individuals are going to be empowered to do, because this is the government training them, indoctrinating them. They've already been indoctrinating them in Montgomery County from K to 12, and then they get out, and then they indoctrinate them further in college, and then they send them out, these ambassadors, to your front door and tell you how you need to live your life. And by the way, the bill also includes training in public schools for the same purpose. Training little zombies, climate zombies for Mark Elrich. So if you podcast listeners want to say, oh, well, it's because Mark Fisher doesn't believe in climate change. Well, let's have an argument about that for a moment. Let's have a discussion. And we'll talk about that some other time because I know we're running out of time. But here's the discussion. And we've talked about it before. And that is, if you think there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere, then we should be going to nuclear energy. It's clean energy. Okay? It's clean energy, period, especially the modern nukes. But Democrats don't want that. They want to tell you, you shouldn't be buying that energy. You should be putting solar panels in your house. You should be wearing a wind turbine on your head because only then are you truly virtuous. So way to go, County Executive Mark Elrich for being the ultimate climate zombie and having the dumbest bill in America. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.